She wasn't tall enough to reach the counter. She couldn't even tie her apron properly. But when her mother fell ill and couldn't work, 9-year-old Luma walked through the doors of the cafe and said 4 words that melted everyone's heart. "I'll work for Mama." It was just past 6 a.m. in Clearwater. The gray sky outside was drizzling, and cold air seeped through the cracks of the window. Inside a small, cluttered apartment, 9-year-old Luma stood beside her mother's couch, holding a bowl of reheated chicken broth. Her mother, Inez Rivera, was wrapped in a worn blanket, her chest rattling with each shallow breath. "I just need to rest, baby. I'll be okay," Inez said between coughs. But Luma wasn't convinced. She watched the woman who was her entire world, a woman who worked from sunrise to sundown at the local cafe just to keep the lights on, now unable to rise. The calendar on the wall had a red circle around today's date, rent due. Luma's jaw tightened. She wasn't the type to cry. She walked quietly to the kitchen, peeked inside her mother's work bag, and stared at the folded apron. The air was heavy with worry, but in her small heart something stronger than fear was growing, determination. Luma didn't have a plan, but she had purpose. While her mother drifted into a fevered sleep, Luma tiptoed into the hallway closet and dug through the pile of laundry until she found Inez's backup apron. It smelled faintly of coffee and vanilla. She wrapped the strings twice around her tiny waist and tied them in a crooked knot. She slid on her 2 big sneakers, grabbed a hoodie from the coat rack, and left a note on the counter that read, "Going to help. I'll be safe. I promise." Luma, the walk to the cafe was 10 blocks. Her steps were short, but her will was tall. Rain drizzled softly as she passed the bakery, the laundromat, and the old bookstore. Every adult she passed looked at her like she was lost, but she kept her eyes forward. By the time she reached the glass doors of Cafe Estrella, she exhaled deeply, wiped her damp sleeves on her face, and pushed the door open. She was 9 years old, but in that moment she was ready to take on the world. The little bell above the cafe door jingled as Luma stepped inside. It was warm and bustling with the clinking of mugs and soft jazz playing overhead. The smell of roasted beans filled the air. Behind the counter, Paula, a tough but fair barista with a no-nonsense ponytail and tired eyes, did a double take. "Luma," she said, stepping forward, "what are you doing here, honey?" Luma stood a little taller and declared, "I'm here to work. Mama's too sick. I'll do her shift." The other employees paused what they were doing. Silence rippled across the cafe. Some customers turned to look, their conversations fading into whispers. "She can't be serious," someone murmured. But Luma's eyes didn't waver. Paula crouched down and gently put her hand on Luma's shoulder. "This isn't a place for kids to work, sweetie." But then Luma said, "We need the money." "I'll do my best." Paula hesitated. Her heart cracked open just a little. "All right," she said softly. "You can help, but only with the easy stuff, okay?" Luma nodded. Her first step into adulthood had begun. They gave her small tasks, stacking napkins, wiping counters, handing menus to guests, with a shy smile. At first her movements were awkward. She nearly knocked over a tray of sugar packets and forgot where the clean mugs went. But every time she fumbled, she picked herself back up. The customers began to notice. One man gave her a wink and said, "You're doing great, kid." A woman with a stroller handed her a $5 tip just for being brave. Luma's face stayed serious. She wasn't doing this for praise. She was doing this for her mom. She peeked at the clock every few minutes, mentally counting how much time was left on a normal shift. Her hands were small, but they moved with quiet focus. Her feet ached, but she refused to sit down. And every time someone asked her if she needed help, she shook her head and repeated softly, "I'm doing this for Mama." That mantra kept her going. Late morning brought a new wave of customers. Among them was a tall man in his 40s, sharply dressed in a tailored navy suit and polished shoes. He ordered a black coffee and settled into a corner booth near the window. Luma approached carefully, both hands wrapped tightly around the cup. "Your coffee, sir," she said, setting it down with as much care as she could. The man raised an eyebrow. "You're a little young for this job, aren't you?" Luma straightened up. "My mom's sick. I'm helping her out." He stared at her. For a moment he didn't respond. Then he smiled, but it wasn't a condescending smile. It was full of surprise. "You're braver than most adults I know," he said quietly. She nodded once and turned to walk away. He pulled out his phone and snapped a photo of her apron dragging behind her. With a pause, he typed a caption. "This 9-year-old girl is working her mom's shift at a cafe in Clearwater. Her courage is something else. #RealHeroes, #support each other," he hit post. And just like that, Luma's quiet act of love started to echo far beyond the cafe walls. Upstairs in a small office above the cafe, Mr. Enzo, the owner, stared down at the security screen showing the floor below. He had seen the little girl's arrival and watched with growing concern. He was a man of rules, a checklist kind of guy. Everything in his cafe ran by the book: schedules, safety, health codes. And this, a child working a shift, this was chaos. He stomped downstairs, his leather shoes clicking on the tiles. The staff braced for a lecture. "Is this true?" he asked Paula, gesturing to Luma, who was quietly sweeping near the coffee bar. "She's helping her mom," Paula replied gently. "She's not hurting anyone." Mr. Enzo approached the girl. "You're Luma," she nodded, blinking but not backing away. "My mom's really sick, sir. She needed help." Enzo exhaled. He didn't know how to respond. This wasn't in the handbook. After a long pause he muttered, "Just today. But someone watches her at all times," and with that the man who never bent a rule bent the most important one. By lunchtime the cafe was buzzing in more ways than one. The suited man's social media post had been shared over 1,000 times and counting. People from neighboring towns were already asking, "Which cafe is this?" The photo of Luma, her small frame in a trailing apron, carefully carrying a mug, was striking. The contrast of childhood and responsibility touched a nerve. By early afternoon, an influencer reposted it, adding, "We don't talk enough about kids like this." And then came the tipping point. A local news outlet picked it up and sent a crew. Outside, a van with Channel 7 Clearwater News on the side rolled up. A woman in heels and a blazer stepped out, holding a mic. Customers peeked through the windows, murmuring with curiosity. Inside, Luma was still working, clearing crumbs from tables, collecting empty mugs. She had no idea the world was watching. She was simply trying to make it through her mother's shift. Mika Navarro, the reporter from Channel 7, was used to covering city council meetings and weather reports. But this was special. She stepped inside Café Estrella, the camera crew behind her. The scent of espresso and baked goods filled the room. "I'm looking for Luma," she announced softly to Paula. Paula hesitated, but Luma, ever polite, stepped forward. "I'm Luma." Mika knelt down, lowering the mic. "Hi, sweetheart. I just wanted to say we're really proud of what you're doing. Would you be okay sharing your story with others?" Luma looked confused. "I'm not doing anything special. I'm just working for Mama." That sentence alone was enough. The segment aired at 6 p.m. sharp. Inez, wrapped in a blanket at home, was stunned to see her daughter's face on TV. The words, "Local girl steps up to save mom's job," scrolled across the screen. Tears filled her eyes. She reached for her phone but couldn't find the words to text. All she could do was whisper, "That's my baby." By the next morning, a line had already formed outside the cafe before sunrise. Locals, strangers, even travelers, people who had seen the news or read the viral post, came not just for coffee but to show support. A florist brought a bouquet of sunflowers and whispered, "For the girl who brightens all our mornings." A young couple left a $50 bill under a sugar jar with the note, "For rent. We've been there." The tip jar, usually filled with coins and the occasional dollar, overflowed with 5s, 10s, and 20s. But it wasn't about money. It was about the quiet awe in the air. People smiled more, spoke kindly, helped one another clear tables. And in the middle of it all, Luma kept working, cheeks flushed but spirit steady. Paula insisted she take breaks, but Luma always said, "Just one more table." She hadn't just helped her mother. She reminded an entire town what community looked like. That afternoon, the cafe doors swung open one more time. Everyone turned. And there, wrapped in a borrowed scarf and leaning slightly on her neighbor's arm, stood Inez Rivera. She looked tired, pale, still weakened by her illness. But her eyes were wide and shimmering. When Luma saw her, she dropped the cloth in her hand and ran. "Mama?" They collided in a tearful hug. "I saw you," Inez whispered, her voice hoarse. "On TV, you worked so hard. I wanted to help," Luma sobbed into her mother's coat. "I didn't want you to get fired." Inez knelt, pulling her daughter close. "You saved us, but more than that, you showed the world who you are." The cafe burst into applause. Even Mr. Enzo wiped his eyes behind the counter. And for the first time in days, Luma smiled without needing to be brave. Within 48 hours, Luma's story had crossed state lines. Messages flooded the cafe's inbox. TV hosts reached out to interview them. A charitable organization offered to cover Inez's rent for an entire year. Another offered free health care for her recovery. But one letter stood out among the rest. It arrived in a pink envelope with gold foil trim, addressed simply to Miss Luma Rivera. Inside was a formal scholarship offer from a prestigious prep school. It included tuition, uniforms, meals, and even a mentorship program. Luma read it aloud, eyes wide with disbelief. "Mama, this is the school with the big library, right?" Inez clutched the letter to her chest, overwhelmed. "Yes, baby, the one you always dreamed of." What began as one shift of quiet responsibility was now shaping Luma's entire future. And still, the little girl remained humble, whispering, "I only wanted to help." A week later, Mr. Enzo called a staff meeting. The cafe was closed for cleaning, but the team gathered around tables, sipping coffee and buzzing about the ongoing media attention. Mr. Enzo, usually stern and stiff, looked different, gentler somehow. "I never thought I'd see the day a 9-year-old would teach me about leadership," he said. Then he pulled a sheet from the clipboard. "I've added a new policy, emergency family shift support. If a parent's too ill to work, we find a way to protect their income and keep their job." The staff clapped, some with tears in their eyes. He then lifted a small frame and showed it to everyone. Inside was a photo of Luma in her oversized apron, wiping a counter with a look of quiet focus. Beneath it, a plaque read, "For those who show up even when they don't have to." He mounted it by the register. From that day forward, customers who saw it asked, "Is she the one?" And everyone proudly replied, "Yes, that's our Luma." Late that night, after the cameras left and the crowds faded, Luma and Inez sat side by side on the rooftop of their apartment building. A blanket was wrapped around their shoulders, and the city lights twinkled below like a second sky. Inez gazed at her daughter. "You've been so strong, but you don't always have to be." Luma looked up. "I was scared, not of the customers, but of you not getting better." Inez gently took her hand. "We're stronger together. And baby, even if the cafe closed, even if we lost the apartment, I'd still have you." "That's enough." They sat there for a long while in silence, listening to the hum of distant traffic and the occasional barking dog. Luma leaned her head on her mother's shoulder and whispered, "I like this part best." "What part?" Inez asked. "When it's just us." And in that moment, neither fame nor fear could touch them. When Luma walked back into school the following Monday, things were different. The hallways buzzed with whispers. Teachers smiled warmly. Principal Harris knelt to greet her at the door. "You've inspired more people than you know," he said, pressing a hand to his chest. "We're proud of you." In class, her desk had a fresh notebook and a flower. A classmate leaned over and whispered, "You're famous." Luma smiled shyly. "I'm just me." During recess, a boy from her class said, "I gave my lunch to someone today. I thought, what would Luma do?" She didn't respond, just beamed. Her story had left the cafe and entered the schoolyard, teaching lessons no textbook ever could. Not about fame, but about heart. That afternoon, the cafe's bell rang, and in walked a familiar face. Eloise, the woman who had once left a $20 tip and kind words. This time she carried a worn leather satchel and a large book tied with ribbon. "I don't know if you remember me," she said to Luma. "But I remember you." Luma nodded slowly. "You had a red scarf." Eloise smiled. "I used to be a journalist. I've written a lot of stories, but yours is my favorite." She untied the ribbon and revealed a scrapbook filled with newspaper clippings, printed comments, handwritten notes, and photos from the cafe's social media. "It's all in here," she said, handing the book to Luma. "So you never forget how many people you helped by just being you." Luma's eyes sparkled. "I get to keep it," Eloise nodded. "And someday you'll write your own." In that moment, the girl who once walked to work in silence now held a story in her hands, a story that would outlive the day she took on the world. The week after the story aired, a group of local business owners and cafe regulars approached Mr. Enzo with an idea. "We want to start something," one of them said. They called it the Rivera Fund, a financial support program for working families facing emergencies. It would provide small grants to parents who couldn't afford to miss work due to illness, injury, or caregiving responsibilities. Within days, the tip jar was replaced with a donation box, and Mr. Enzo linked it to a digital fundraiser. A chalkboard was mounted near the register that read, "Because no child should have to take on the world alone." Donations poured in, $5 here, $20 there. And slowly the numbers added up. $5,000, then $12,000, then $50,000 in under a month. Inez cried the first time she saw the fund's name. "I didn't think we mattered this much," she whispered, but the truth was they did. Luma had unknowingly started a movement that would lift countless families long after her shift ended. One rainy morning, a blue tarp covered the cafe's front sign. The regulars buzzed with curiosity. At noon, Mr. Enzo stepped outside with a small ladder and peeled the tarp away. Gasps followed. The new name, Cafe Courage, and beneath it an elegant gold lettering. Inspired by Luma Rivera, people stopped to take photos. Parents brought their kids to stand in front of the building, pointing to the name with admiration. Inside, not much changed. Same coffee, same smiles, but the spirit felt new. There was now a framed menu item called the Luma Latte, which came with extra foam and a heart dusted in cinnamon. Everywhere you looked, the cafe buzzed with pride, and in the corner near the little helper station, a photo of Luma hung permanently. Her arms full of menus, her eyes focused, her apron dragging behind her. What started as one act of love had become the soul of the business. Back in their small apartment, things were beginning to feel normal again, but better than before. Inez had regained her strength, and though she returned to the cafe part-time, She also enrolled in an online course to become a preschool teacher. "I want to give kids the kind of support you gave me," she told Luma. Luma, now enrolled in the scholarship prep school, was thriving. She made new friends, joined the school's writing club, and even started journaling about her experiences. Each night they studied together, made dinner together, and laughed more than they used to. The fridge was fuller, the heater worked. There were still hard days, but fewer of them. And when Luma looked around, she no longer saw just a home. She saw a symbol of everything they'd built together. On a bright Thursday morning, a man in uniform knocked on their apartment door. He handed Inez a velvet envelope with an official city seal. It was an invitation. Luma had been chosen as a Youth Civic Inspiration honoree, recognized for her courage, integrity, and impact. At the ceremony in City Hall, Luma wore a simple white dress and held Inez's hand tightly as they walked on stage. The mayor gave a moving speech. Sometimes, the smallest voice echoes the loudest. Luma showed us that responsibility, love, and community don't require age, just heart. When asked if she wanted to say something, Luma stepped up to the microphone and said, "I didn't think anyone would notice. I just wanted to help Mama, but thank you for helping us back." The audience rose in a standing ovation. Inez covered her mouth to hold back tears. Her daughter had gone from cafe helper to hometown hero, and now the whole city stood behind her. Months later, the media buzz quieted and the cafe returned to a gentler rhythm. But one crisp autumn morning, Luma was back at the counter, not working, just visiting after school. A small boy around 7 stood awkwardly near the door with his backpack. His eyes were anxious, his shirt too big. "My mom's really sick," he mumbled. "She said she might lose her job if she didn't show up today." Luma's heart clenched. She walked over, crouched beside him, and smiled. "Want to help us pass out menus?" The boy nodded. Paula saw the exchange and gave Luma a wink. History, it seemed, was repeating itself, in the best way. Because now, Luma wasn't just a girl who once took a shift. She had become the quiet leader, the kind who lifts others by showing them it's okay to try. And with that, her story continued. Not in headlines, but in hearts. If this story inspired you, please like, share, and subscribe for more uplifting stories of resilience, love, and everyday heroes. Your support helps us keep these stories alive, because sometimes all it takes is one small act to change everything.